So great to have everybody here for the webinar on how to embed improvement in your organization with the daily management system. Um, I must say I'm very pleased that we are able to use these extraordinary times we're in to share some of our experience with you. And I certainly hope that it will be a good use of your time. So just some housekeeping things. We're recording the webinar, so we take your participation as agreement to this. And the recording will be available on our website after the session. I'm planning to speak for at most 30 minutes, but I really hope that after that you'll be able to share your experience and ask questions if any. And we'll aim to close after an hour. Some technicalities. If you'd like to submit any questions while I'm busy with the presentation, please use the Zoom chat function, and Sam will collate the questions and read them out for us after the presentation. And then if you'd like to say something, you've all been muted, so please raise your hand at the bottom on your taskbar so that you can, I'm not sure, you might be able to unmute yourself, but just so we can make sure that everybody hears you. All right, so with that, I want to jump into asking what is the problem we're trying to solve. As lean thinkers, we usually start there. And many of you would have seen this diagram before, the PDCA cycle, and moving up the hill doing continuous improvement. But the challenge is that this is like Sisyphus rolling the ball up the mountain. It has a, as Jim Womack says, a deep desire to roll back down again. And the countermeasure that we put in place is like a wedge to stop the ball rolling back. And that wedge is usually regarded as standard work. But it's not quite as simple as that. Jim Lancaster, who inherited the company Landtech from his father, the company was a case study in lean thinking. And many years later, he expressed his frustration with not getting the benefits that are associated with lean management, and came to the realization that it's not just about improving performance, but also that once you have good improvement projects or continuous improvement, you may also have a deterioration problem. So improvement can be done by individuals and small teams, but the standard work that goes with it is not so easy, because it's about the more routine keeping the system going. And that's what this webinar is about. It's recognized this issue that we need a management system in the lean transformation framework. If you look in the middle of the house, you'll see that question. What management system do we need to keep a lean management system going in the right direction? Of course, there are many other issues as well, but today we'll be focusing on the daily management system part. So there are many different versions of daily management systems. This, therefore, is not the only way to approach it. But I would contend that these practices that I've got listed here on the screen probably make the core of most daily management systems. And I'm starting to explain it for frontline teams, because in some ways that's where it's most important, and it's also easiest to explain. The first practice, visual performance measurement, is about making key performance measures for that team visible, probably on a board where they would then have their daily teamwork meetings. And at that meeting, they would be reviewing those measurements and assessing whether work is proceeding as normal or whether there's some corrective action necessary. SOPs at the frontline level describes how to do the work correctly right first time. They also come in many different ways, but a well-known one is associated with TWI, training with industry. Continuous process improvement is the improvement that we often talk about in lean management. Most of us use A3s or Toyota Kata, but of course there are many other improvement methods that are also can be used. And then last but not least, 5S workplace organization is about keeping, well, first of all, organizing the workplace so that it's conducive to get the work done, and then keeping it in that way. Unfortunately, my desk is not a good example of 5S. Last but not least, management standard work. I've added the sixth practice because a DMS does not keep going by itself. Like all other activities and operations, it's subject to deterioration of performance as well. And so one needs a team leader or a line manager to support the frontline team by keeping an eye on whether they are still doing the necessary practices. And if not, say for instance, there's a graph that's not updated by the team meeting time, or a facilitator is allowing the meeting to carry on for too long, the manager looking after that team would nudge the team back on the right direction. And of course, the more often that's done, the easier it is to help them to keep on track. So having listed these practices, what I want to explain now by using what I call the Double-Loop PDCA is how they all work together to make up an effective daily management system. So we're all familiar with PDCA for improvement, but what we found is that there's also PDCA in normal work. And the practices fit into the normal work cycle as follows. The plan for what we want to do is in effect the 5S, in the sense that it is how we think the workplace would be best organized to do the work. And then SOPs are the plan for how we're going to do the work. Then to move forward to getting from doing to checking, we need to do measurement while we are doing our normal work. Without measurement, we're not able to check. And to get from checking to acting, we need to stop the bus for a moment and have that team meeting where we're able to review performance, check the graphs with trends over time. And at the act part of the PDCA, we have a decision to make. Either work is progressing normally, the graphs are mostly green, in which case we keep on working with the same plans as we have. However, if something is off track, the improvement work cycle kicks in. Now, it could be a quick corrective action, but it might also turn out to be a larger project that needs us to use a systematic method. And there again, to get from P to D, we use the A3 method mostly to develop a plan. So the A3 does have an implementation section, but the real value of A3s lie on the left-hand side of the method of the A3 page, with thoroughly investigating so that you have a good plan. Then when it comes to implementation, we found that doing those experiments are best managed by means of the Toyota katas, in particular the PDCA cycles record. And that as we're doing the experiments, checking whether they've worked, and then acting once again, there's a choice to be made. The first is, if we haven't yet achieved the goal that we set in the A3, then we need to keep on experimenting, adjusting what we experiment with, what we have learned out of the previous experiment, and keep on going in that continuous process improvement cycle until we've achieved our goal. Then we switch over to making the new, better way of doing the work into an SOP, and it becomes part of normal work. So this Double-Loop PDCA is helpful to people because it positions, it helps them to understand where they are in the daily management system. And in particular, it helps the confusion that sometimes arises between having an improvement or change mindset versus being in a compliance or stability mindset that you need for normal work. And when people are able to recognize which PDCA cycle they're in, they're able to then have the right behavior. So in a normal work cycle, it's appropriate to be in a compliance mindset. Because without that compliance, you won't get stability in the process. Whereas in the improvement cycle, we need to do experiments and we need to be okay with failing. Obviously, we want to set things up in such a way that the failure does not affect normal work. But nevertheless, it's a very different mindset from the normal work mindset. And this is one of the big advantages of understanding the daily management system as a Double-Loop PDCA. Let me go on to explain that the DMS works at all organizational levels. In principle, it's the same, but the practices are different. So I've just explained how it works at the frontline level, but then there's also the management and executive levels. At the executive level, we expect the senior management to do strategic A3s, and in particular to establish the true north long-term goals for the organization. Using the kata language, those long-term visions are broken down into medium-term challenges that the management are asked to address. And to achieve that, they would do system or value stream A3s. Management then would pass down short-term targets to the frontline people, and they would then be needing to do operational improvement to meet those short-term targets. And in that way, true north deployment can take place throughout the whole organization and align people in the organization with the vital few true north objectives. On the other side, management need feedback. And so it starts with the measurements and the daily team meetings at frontline level. Those then would be passed up the organization. At management level, maybe people will have weekly meetings and aggregated measurements. and their work standard would be something like the annual operating plan. And then maybe senior management would be meeting monthly, and their measurements might be at the monthly level, and the standard that they're working to is True North. So having explained the way the Double-Loop PDCA framework works, I want to alert you to something called the standardized do, check, act cycle. It's not as well known as the PDCA cycle, but apparently Edwards Deming showed this, taught this to the Japanese in the 1950s. And in essence, it works much the same as PDCA, except that it's applicable in the normal work cycle, and that the P is replaced with a standard. In other words, we work to a standard in a similar fashion as explained in the Double-Loop PDCA. What's helpful about this understanding of SDCA is that it's when you initially implement an improvement, once it's been tested as part of an improvement project, the implementation in the normal work situation does not always run perfectly smoothly. And so SDCA is about removing the variation from the operational performance. And then it's once again followed by a PDCA cycle to make the next level of improvement. So just to alert us to the important work that needs to be done after an improvement has been proven to be effective. In other words, that implementation is it's necessary to make sure that it works when it's transferred to the real world as well. So the Double-Loop PDCA was developed at Groote Schuur because staff were complaining that they didn't understand how all these new practices fit together. And here you can see Garth Hankey, who's the continuous improvement facilitator at Groote Schuur, explaining to a group how these practices work in the Double-Loop PDCA. I'm going to ask Garth at the end of the presentation to give us a quick taste of what it's been like. What was also interesting is that one day Garth was running a workshop for the staff, the clinic staff in the specialized medicine clinic. And Sister Davids, the head nurse, immediately related to the PDCA, Double-Loop PDCA. And in fact, immediately after the workshop, she then explained to a colleague who wasn't as clear about it how the practices fit into the Double-Loop PDCA, which was very encouraging to see that people could relate to the Double-Loop PDCA quite quickly. I want to go on to explaining some of my thinking that sits behind the Double-Loop PDCA. And the first is systems thinking. And here we see a typical diagram showing the basics of how a system works. You'll see a diagram like this in just about every operations management textbook in the first chapter, and in fact in my one as well. What I want to highlight is that from systems dynamics, we know that the core positive reinforcement loop, that the basic primary value adding process in the system works by, is a very strong visible loop. What's maybe less well known is that there are many small negative feedback loops that eat away at operational performance. These could be machines not producing as well as they used to because they're wearing. It could be small interruptions during the day for people doing administrative work. And individually, they don't seem significant enough to pay attention to them. But in reality, collectively, all these small mice eating away at our operational performance could end up creating a lot of decay in operational performance. And in fact, that's why we need something like the DMS at the frontline level, because senior management are not able to even know about these things. So that's one of the reasons why I think that a daily management system is worth the time and effort to get it up and running. The next part of systems thinking that I found helpful is Stafford Beer's viable systems model, the other VSM. And a very brief explanation of it, the thinking behind the viable systems model is that it's a generalized model of any organizational system that needs certain elements for it to survive. And what this diagram here shows is, on the left-hand side, the environment that the organization fits into. The diamond at the top is the management system, if you want to call it that, that regulates, coordinates, and controls the operational system on the bottom right of the diagram. So an image that would help us to make sense of this is if you take the human as an organic system. We have the brain, which regulates and coordinates everything that we do. And then there are the subsystems like the muscles and the heart and the lungs that each have a particular function in order to keep the whole body going. What I want to highlight is that this system is recursive. In other words, that the system structure is replicated at all levels. So if you see the diamond and the ellipse together, then you'll see it replicated here at the subsystem level. Let me show you again. So here's the whole system. And then at the subsystem level, the diamond and the operational system are repeated. In other words, there's a control mechanism at all levels of subsystems, and that's what makes it possible to manage at different levels. So you can see the analogy here with the different levels at which teams work in the daily management system, it's consistent with the viable systems model and the assumption that you need to replicate the management functions at subsystem level as well. So with that, I would like to invite comments and questions. Sam, have any questions maybe come up in the chat so far?
No, Anton.
All right. Well, I almost forgot to ask Garth to share with us some of the experiences at Groote Schuur. Garth?
Yeah.
Won't you? Morning.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So you've explained it quite perfectly. It's not really a lot I can add, but maybe what I can add is what happened before the WPDCA at Groote Schuur and what is currently happening after the WPDCA. So before the WPDCA, there were no sustainability of any improvement initiatives. Teams got together, they started the improvement journey, they achieved great results, but the results were very seldom sustained. They either got frustrated because they didn't know when to stop improving, or they didn't have the right support. And then the practices that embedded within the WPDCA was understood as almost as independently. So when you talk about SOPs, they forgot about the rest of it. They were always focused on SOPs. So when we introduced the WPDCA, all the puzzle pieces started to fit together. And it was easy for teaching purposes and for learning purposes, not only from my perspective, but also from the staff's perspective, explaining it to one another. I've seen executives in meetings when the people are lost telling people we're at the normal side of the WPDCA, we're not yet at the improvement side. So that was quite beneficial for executives. And then it also led people to reduce some of their measurements, especially the indicators aligned to the true north. The departments had hundreds of measurements, but currently they focus on a few performance measurements. Rather than focusing on all the measurements, they're driving to improve a few of the measurements. And then the executives also now use the WPDCA to allow every initiative in the departments to align to the true north. So the WPDCA, in its flexibility, it's also easy for teams to start anywhere on the WPDCA and then introduce the practices as they come after each other. So I don't know if that helps from my side.
Garth, that was very helpful, and please pass our thanks to the support team there.
Thank you, thank you. I'll mute now.
Okay, anybody else?
Anton, I do have one question.
Yes.
How elaborate does an SOP need to be? You referred to TWI, where it is more applicable to use a one-point lesson or work instruction. The SOP then describes the entire process, for example, for HR, new employee onboarding process.
Okay, so let me start by saying that SOPs come in many different forms. Some technical SOPs can be very lengthy and very technical and complicated to understand. And in fact, something as simple as a checklist can also be an SOP of sorts. So what's important to say here is that one size does not fit all. Maybe I can just say that with TWI, what has made it very popular is the fact that it does not just tell you what to do. It also has a second column explaining how to do it, and a third column explaining why each step is necessary. And with the right introduction and support, TWI has been found to be very effective at helping teams to maintain their performance.
Thanks, Anton. I also have another question. The double loop would be very helpful to highly regulated businesses or industries. I have pushback on improvement by regulatory compliance experts, fearing change controls that would be outside the boundaries of the license. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, okay. So let me say that the other side of this dilemma is also true. I've worked in the justice sector where standards are represented sometimes by regulations and even laws. And one such situation was that witnesses were required to be at court at 8:30, and then only to sit around all day, and quite often not to be called to testify. And when attempts were made to change this, we were told that it is in the law that they have to be there at 8:30, and it cannot be changed, thereby exacerbating the frustration that people engaging with the justice system had. So my take on this is that regulations and policies should preferably focus on the outcomes and the standards, and limit the prescriptive part of how a process should work to the minimum. Because circumstances where that process need to work in reality differ. And as long as people who are working in the process are clear that there are certain minimum requirements that they need to meet, the way in which they meet those requirements may well need to be locally adapted. So it's a difficult balance to maintain, but let me just say that blind compliance can often be very harmful as well.
Thank you, Anton. Can you maybe just explain to the group very briefly what TWI is for those of them that don't know?
So TWI stands for Training Within Industry, and it was a program that was started during the Second World War, when most of the men who were working in industry had to go off to fight the war in faraway places. And but the supply chains to produce war material and keep people supplied still had to be kept going. And so TWI had to very rapidly introduce strangers to doing the work, and that training program was developed. After the war, it was a part of the Marshall Plan to support Japan and Germany's reconstruction, and it was introduced in Japan, where it was put to very effective use to help to improve the performance of Japanese industry.
Thank you. I have another question. Does the double-loop PDCA cycle suggest that it will be difficult to use the A3 methodology with structured teamwork, SOPs, and 5S in place?
Sorry, it should read without SOPs, 5S in place.
Sorry, Pierre.
Look, I don't want to say that you may not use A3s or any other improvement method without also doing the normal loop PDCA. Sorry, I've just got to, nowadays the phone calls come through on your computer as well. But let me just say this. The first thing is that problem solving needs to be done differently at different levels in the organization. And allow me to refer you to a new book called 4 Types of Problem Solving, which explains improvement at different levels in the organization, and therefore how it needs to be differently. Does that help to answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Anton. Does.
I have another question here, Anton. Can we say that in normal operations, if the standardization is successful, we don't need to plan anymore? The STCA takes over the PDCA.
No, I wouldn't say so, because the standard can change. So a standard can change for a wide variety of reasons, and we sometimes talk about created standards. In other words, that let's say due to changes in the environment, we need to up our game, and management makes a decision that, let's say, we need to shorten our delivery time substantially because food delivery is now a big issue. Again, an improvement PDCA would probably be appropriate under those circumstances, and to up the game and then standardize after we've figured out a better way of doing it.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us. If I can just quickly mention that we have, as you can see, online is becoming very important in our offerings. We have the Lean Management Development Program. The Cape Town one has started, but there's still time to join the Joburg LMDP. There's A3 problem solving, which is offered online, coaching online or face-to-face, as well as experiments that we're doing with virtual Gemba walks, Kata implementation support. And then we also do in-house work, strategy deployment, lean transformation, journey design, RPI workshops, that stands for Rapid Process Improvement. And I shouldn't forget to mention the Lean Executive Coaching Program, which helps senior management to learn how to work within the Lean management system. Last but not least, we're hoping soon to establish what we call Lean Learning Clusters, where a small group of organizations meet quarterly and learn from one another to help each other on their Lean journeys. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Thanks very much once again for joining us today. And we wish you well in these extraordinary times and on your Lean transformation journey. Bye then.
Thank you so much.